studying the Islamic tradition in academia and researching Muslim diversity and identity. We're looking forward to the rest of the panels, including this one, entitled Teaching and Pedagogy in Islamic Studies, and we have no other than the Dr. Judith Berling, Professor of Chinese and Comparative Religions. I guess, can we add the title Emeritus now, or is that, yes? And I think everyone knows Dr. Judith, but those of you who don't, or who might be viewing this recording later, she has been an incredible mentor to me. I continue to learn so much from her and to many of our students here. If she didn't single-handedly, as many of us feel, run all the program on non-Christian traditions that were being studied here and mentoring all the students, which has been huge, she has already taken upon herself in her emeritus status to continue working with students in Islamic studies at the MA level. So we are extremely grateful to you, Dr. Berling, for all that you have helped us achieve and continue to helping us achieve. And also, just it's important to say, as I mentioned at the outset, that a lot of the ways in which we are doing our work here at the GTU, to think about our scholarship in the context of not just our texts and the context, but also thinking about our scholarship in outside of academia. I think these are really important things that we've learned from her classes, including things around methodology, and I think most importantly, how do we think about things that we've already talked about this morning, both the intra-religious and the inter-religious parts of our work. So without further ado, I want to invite Dr. Judith Berling and the rest of the panel.
It's an honor to be here. I hope, if I'm the Judith Berling, I hope there's no other Judith Berling. One is more than enough in the world, inshallah. But I'm really delighted to be here and to be able to chair this panel. Working with and teaching the Islamic students at the GTU has been one of the great blessings of the last portion of my time here after CIS opened. I've had the privilege of teaching 3 out of the 4 people on this panel and several other people in this room. And I've learned so much from them. They've inspired me, and I'm so impressed by their brilliance, their courage, and the significance of their work. The world needs their scholarship and their leadership. So I'm pleased to be on a panel with some of them today. So our first speaker is Reem Javed, a PhD candidate in interdisciplinary studies at the GTU. And her paper is called Reflections on Course Design and Islamic Education. Reem.
The paper I'm presenting, as Dr. Berling said, is Reflections on Course Design and Islamic Education. And this is the same paper that I presented last year at the same time, so just for those people that are hearing it a second time. Okay. And the purpose of the presentation and the paper was to highlight the wisdom of Dr. Berling's pedagogy, in which she focuses on students and student context. And so I'm going to talk about how she does this and how I understood and interpreted her pedagogy and applied it. So just first, a background for the presentation. So just from the title of the paper, course design. So what is course design? Course design specifically, it was, no longer is unfortunately, but it was a semester-long doctoral seminar which Dr. Berling taught for almost 20 years here at the GTU. And in it she taught doctoral students how to think and plan as a teacher. So that's a very, very key element to the design of this course. And Islamic education is the class that I designed while taking course design. And I actually had the opportunity to take it twice. And so it's been a huge blessing for me to have had that opportunity. So this is the second time around the class that I designed. And so, let's see if this works. So the reflections on course design and Islamic education come together around the specific point of how to think and plan as a teacher. Okay. So I'm just starting the conversation on course design. I just want to talk a little bit about how courses in college and university environments are traditionally designed. And one of the ways is that they're often a replication or amalgamation of the teacher's own undergraduate or graduate experiences. Okay, and that is a way to do it, and and it does work. And another way to design the class, or it's part of the first way, is just coverage and introducing the subject. Okay, so Dr. Berling talks about this in her paper, Getting Out of the Way, where coverage and making certain books and authors and concepts, making sure that those are covered, that's a really important part of the design of a lot of college and university courses. And you can take this discussion and apply it to other learning settings as well. So, like I said, while these types of designs, they're important, and they're definitely a way to design a course. Coverage, introducing the subject, and just, the teacher using their own undergraduate and undergraduate experiences to primarily inform how they're designing a course. If this particular type of design is primarily focused on the teacher's performance and the teacher's presentation and the teacher's knowledge. Okay? And so to make a shift in the design to what is the student actually experiencing in class, and what is the student actually learning, and is the student making connections outside of the class. So those are some things to just shift the perspective when you're actually sitting down to design the course. So just reading a specific excerpt from the syllabus for our class, Course Design, that was written by Dr. Berling. She said that the seminar itself, it builds on critical pedagogy, the approaches to teaching and learning that are student-centered, that recognize the cultural, social, and individual differences that students bring to the classroom, and that approach course design by asking what interests and knowledge will students actually bring to the course and take from it, rather than simply focusing on teaching a topic. Okay? So just pulling out a few questions. So what do students bring to a course, and what do they actually learn in a course? And just building on a few of these questions as well, why is it important to focus on students? And what makes the process of learning and teaching optimal? And what is the purpose of learning and teaching? So just kind of, reflecting on those as we sit down to design our courses. So, if a course is designed such that it honors students and their differences, it's clear that the teacher understands the students, that they can connect to what they learn. What they're learning is relevant to them. They will hold on to it. And the learning and teaching, the exchange will be more significant, and the potential exists for lifelong changes. And so that point there, where that they will hold on to it, I think that's really critical. So in the class course design, Dr. Berling introduced this handout diagram, which I made an image of. And this was something that we often had to do in this class, where we talk about, where we kind of sit down and do visualizations, metaphors, just to understand what is the process of teaching. So the handout that Dr. Berling gave us was, representing the factor shaping course design as a flame. And so in this flame, you can see that the teacher is the central portion of the flame here. And the students, right, are the brightest portion of the flame. And there are three other types of factors. You have departmental considerations, you have institutional considerations, and you have considerations about greater society as well. But, the teacher being the central part of the flame, and the students being the largest and most significant part of the flame. So just that was something for us to reflect on as we were doing our work. Okay. And so how did Dr. Berling focus on, how did she introduce to us student-centered pedagogy? What was in the design of her course design class while we were designing our courses? So, there were many aspects to it. One was just modeling. Just in the way that she taught the class, the first time there was like a large rectangular table. The second time I took it, there was a circular table, and she would sit with us as one of the students. And if you walked in, I don't think you could really tell which one of us was student, which one of us was professor. And so, just being with us as one of us, that was a really big part of it. And, and she sat at different locations, along the table, just being with other students at different times during the course of our semester. So just modeling in the way that she taught the class. And it's not that the class wasn't organized and structured. She'd done a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that happened. So it's a very organized, student-centered, teacher participation as a student. That's the setup. Okay. And then another element of her design was common readings. We had to, as a group, we had to read several books that basically opened up a window into understanding students better in terms of learning styles, different learning styles, and diversity dynamics in the classroom. And so we read Howard Gardner's Intelligence Reframed, Mary Belenke's Women's Ways of Knowing, and we also, read Dr. Berling's Understanding Other Religious Worlds, which is, particularly important for the setting here at the Graduate Theological Union. And but we were not just asked to read these books. We were asked to read them, group together and present to our classmates and teach them about what we learned about diversity dynamics, and also invite their feedback. So on multiple levels, we were being, saturated in this very student-centered pedagogy. And then the fourth one here is we had mini discussions and student-initiated topics. And again, through the design of the class, she had several opportunities for students to bring their own concerns about teaching and initiate a topic, bring the discussion, do their research, and invite the discussion from their peers. For example, we had a discussion about, what is a student learning objective versus a student learning outcome versus a course objective. And we had discussion about, what is the value of grading rubrics. And so these were just some different discussions that we had. And so while it wasn't necessarily in the way the course was, just bringing students' concerns up and out, that just kind of enriched the class even more. And the final and largest part of this class was called the syllabus project. This was the course that we were designing while we were taking her class, course design. And again, while we're doing this, we have different checkpoints. We have to begin with a context report, where the first thing that we do isn't, designing the philosophy class or designing the class about Islam, Islam 101. But the first thing that we do is we go and research the institution and the group of students that we might actually be teaching. And so that's the first thing that we begin with. And then, we bring that to our peers, we discuss it, and then, there are various steps. Then we do the syllabus, then we do an educational philosophy. So all along the way, we're putting this together while we're being, steeped in these other elements of the class itself. So that was the experience of course design. And so my syllabus project, while I was experiencing this, was Islamic education. This was the class that I designed while I was in course design. And even for a class such as this one, it was a very specific topic. But even though it's a very specific topic, there's definitely room for student voice. And while there were many elements of the design that I infused into my syllabus, I'm just going to talk about three. So I'm going to talk about student forums, understanding context, and then I'm going to talk about taking an international event and turning it into a teaching moment. Okay, so this is an example of one of the student forums that I had, which was an introductory forum. And this was something that Dr. Berling had in her class as well, where you can see the way the questions are structured. They're very open, they're very inviting, and they're also intended to acknowledge that the student's experience that they're bringing to the class is very important. So the first set of questions just asking about, basic things like your name, your program, your faith background, have you attended Islamic school? So just those, basic details. And then the second set of questions, is asking deeper questions. How do you define education, educational philosophy, pedagogy, and how did you come to these definitions? And did you come to these definitions through experience, reading, or a combination of both? And so in asking these questions and, kind of pulling out this information from the student, I actually, in the first time, I did actually introduce a reading just based upon what I understood of the students that I had. And so that's a really important part too, not to simply ask the questions and then leave it, but to ask the questions and then to actually have enough resources from your own experiences to be able to respond to the questions that you've asked. Okay. All right. And then, so another element of the design was just understanding and acknowledging the context of my students and of myself. Just planning the class a year earlier and thinking about Islamic education, media has an extraordinary hold over images of Islam. And everyone who watches or listens to the news or doesn't even watch, the news, you're most likely going to be affected by certain images associated with Islam, right? And so, okay. And so in just understanding this, if I introduced a class called Islamic education without actually responding to media images that they would have about Islam, about Islam in their mind, we wouldn't really be on the same page when we're having that discussion. And, my understanding of Islamic education, which I don't think is really obvious, to a student, would be that it's about virtue or character education, right? And so, but if you had not researched and studied this topic, how would you know that? Okay, so in addressing the media images associated with Islam, I used a lecture by Dr. Jiwa, and in which he details out 5 media pillars of Islam, 5 frames through which the media portrays Islam. And they're 9/11, violence and terrorism, Muslim women and veiling, East and West, clash of civilizations, and the Middle East. Okay, so any mention of Islam will often, conjure up images in the mind associated with any one of these 5 frames. So my goal was not to discuss them in great detail. I spent 1 or 2 class sessions on it, but it was simply to acknowledge that they exist, bring them up and out, and then kind of put them aside while I went through the class. Because if I didn't, then, halfway somewhere down the line in class, he would be wondering, like, what are we talking about and what is actually in my mind? And so, so that was a really important part that I felt it was really important to do. And then the third element of my design was taking an international event and turning that into a teaching moment. So from the first time I took course design, I remembered a conversation, one of our many discussions that we had in class about a teaching moment, and in which Dr. Berling, she shared how a drunk driving accident at Indiana University, where she was teaching at the time, how that had really affected the students at her school. And how she took that event, and she made it into a teaching moment on Taoist non-action, which was what she was teaching about at the time. And, majority of instructors, there's something that happens, but I need to, focus on this concept, I need to get this book done, I need to do X, Y, or Z, but to kind of, put a hold on all of that, and then make it relevant to students, was very important. So she took a local event, and she turned it into a teaching moment. And so I took an international event, an international tragedy, and connected it to the discussion of this class, specifically the lack of proper Islamic education in regards to ISIS, its leaders, its followers. And, in doing so, I prepared by reading a short book called Refuting ISIS, listening to several interviews, and putting together a lecture. So it was about 2 weeks out from when it actually happened. But because I had organized and designed the class a year before, I was able to move things around, remove a few readings, and do this for the student, because I felt that this was really important to make it relevant for them, because this was, pretty significant. And so just connecting, what is happening in class to what is happening into the world. Just, again, this is, helping students to really hold on to what they learn. Okay, so I got the 5-minute. I think I just have one more slide. Yeah. So those were just a few things. So, what course design was, what Islamic education was that I designed while I was in course design, and just 3 elements of the design that I found were important to talk about today. And so, just bringing up this course design factor handout again, I would just, just to myself and to all of us, here, when we sit down to write our course syllabus, for whatever courses we'll be teaching, in the future, if you're sitting in your office or at home or in a coffee shop, what factors are shaping the design of your course? To really reflect on that. is there a way to more significantly consider students? How? And why is that important? You know, sometimes we have to sit and have those conversations with ourselves. And, you know, and just thinking about what is the purpose of teaching and learning, and how can we make that exchange more relevant and more valuable in consideration of what students bring to the class and what they take away with them when they leave. Okay. So just, yeah, so this is just, you know, shifting from the teacher-centric model to a student-centric model, just, you know, in benefit of our students. So, you know, this paper itself, it was my thoughts as I went through course design and, you know, Islamic education. And so, because that was the way that, you know, Dr. Berling designed the class, thinking and planning. So I wrote the paper also thinking and planning about course design. So thank you.
And she's a retired United Methodist pastor and interfaith facilitator. And her paper is entitled Sirah Stories, A Gift to Everyone. Alexis.
Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I bring greetings from the Central Valley, small city of Stockton, to all of you this day, and I'm delighted to be here. And I guess I'm the only panelist who was not blessed to study with Dr. Berling, so I greet you now.
Thank you. I wish I had
Greetings of peace and appreciation, and
I wish I'd had you as a student.
yes. Well, had I been an MA student rather than a just small certificate student, I would undoubtedly have experienced Dr. Berling, I'm sure. So I want to watch my time here.
I'm watching it for you. Don't
Okay, that's great. Because, brothers and sisters, if we have a little time, I'm going to invite you all to do something of a vocal nature with me very briefly. So that may be a help as our post-luncheon bodies are digesting and being here. So it's a joy to be here. Since completing the certificate in Islamic Studies in 2015, my work has primarily involved public talks on the Sirah of Prophet Muhammad, drawing on both Islamic and non-Islamic sources in English, and not on any Islamophobic sources. Although the materials were initially generated primarily for non-Muslim audiences, who have little or no knowledge, usually, of the Prophet's life, the presentations led to expanding that material somewhat for a weekly program called the Sirah Stories Hour on an Islamic blog talk radio for a largely African-American audience, which is partly why I was asking the questions I was asking of Rashida earlier. During the summer, I'll be doing an interfaith interview program on that blog talk radio, which will hopefully be replaced by a weekly interfaith panel in the fall, which will have a Muslim host and a number of participants from varied faiths. And I would imagine I'll be the representative of Protestant Christianity, probably. We'll see how many folks are there. So the first thing I want to share, I'm going to end with my gratitude and what I've learned when I was a certificate student. But I want to start with why Sirah. I chose that as the title today. And when I completed the certificate, and even as I was doing it, I thought, how am I going to use this information? Now, I had had some experience of interreligious work, primarily in Stockton when I was still a pastor there. And through that and various things that I don't have time to share, I had been drawn to the study mostly of Islam outside of the Christian tradition. But how was I going to use what I had learned? So I developed the Sirah Stories presentations for several reasons, and there are two of which I really want to share with all of you. The first is, and I'm saying something here that for all of us here probably is a truism, stories tend to be innately interesting to people. I mean, absolutely. Now, I'm not naively saying stories are always peace building. Stories can be destructive and tearing apart. But my intention in doing Sira is to have a peacemaking and an understanding building endeavor. So I myself am deeply interested in the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and I'm enthusiastic about sharing Sira stories with people. It's not the only thing I've done, but it was until now the primary thing. And I joke with non-Muslims, especially Christian friends, that the life of the Prophet is much more interesting and richer than the life of Isa. Well, needless to say, that gets a lot of attention from Christians. They look confused. They were like, how is that possible? Well, it's actually patently obvious, and I don't know that I need to do it here. A man who lived so much longer, a man who changed the whole culture of an entire region, and that's not any ontological or theological assessment of their value, but it is a historical fact. I mean, it is. So as listeners learn about the Prophet's life, they necessarily are learning about the foundations, the beginnings, the early history of Islam. In humanizing history, narratives tend to diffuse judgment and resistance. Do they eliminate it? No, I'm not saying that. But stories with a peacemaking endeavor and a bridge-building intention do tend to decrease or diffuse the amount of alienation. When the Sira touch on issues or events that non-Muslims tend to judge critically, and foremostly, and I was a bit daunted when I came, in the 10 weeks I was sharing the life of the Prophet on the Islamic Blog Talk, when I came to the stories of military engagements, I admit I'm not a historian scholar, and I was a bit daunted with how they would be received, based on also some interactions I had had in sharing some of the military engagements of the Prophet and the believers with other Christians, right? So, but when it comes to military engagements in the story of the life of the Prophet, and foremostly the execution of the Jewish tribe, the Bani Qurayza, those events will make a different kind of sense when they are described in their historical and cultural context. This does not mean that non-Muslims are going to understand them just as Muslims do. It does mean that now non-Muslims have some kind of historical and contextualized understanding from which to judge that event, from which to receive it. Stories of people and events can engage one's heart along with one's head, one's cognitive, one's mental stuff going on, and one's viscera, the body itself. So that's the first reason, just the blessing of stories and how they can benefit and connect us. The second one is, I am not a scholar, so I guess that makes me a minority person today, as I stand up here. I am not a scholar, and I'm not qualified to teach Islam 101 or Quran 101 in any depth or with intellectual integrity. Plus, I do not have any desire or call to do so. And by the way, I don't have a call to teach Christianity 101 either. I'm not qualified to teach a course in the Quran, of course. In the Sira Stories presentations, often in one presentation, and presentations are usually an hour to an hour and a half, I often cite one ayah or surah from the Quran. For example, one of my favorite stories in the Sira of the Prophet is the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which is deeply moving for me. And those of you who are familiar with it, probably most of my Muslim friends here, know that it is probably the time, it is the most recorded in the Sira in which Umar ibn al-Khattab got in the Prophet's face and said, how can you sign this treaty? You're giving in to the Quraysh. And the Prophet does a lot of compromising or accommodation. And as they are heading back, and then Umar does sign the treaty, but with reluctance, it seems clear. And when they are heading back, the believers are heading back to Medina, Umar is nervous. He is nervous because he has just behaved with the prophet in a way he never had before, and he is nervous that there may come a revelation which will condemn him. But the prophet reassures him because a revelation has just been received, and it is the beginning of Surah 48, which says, this has been for you an important victory. And I use that, I mention it, I don't talk about it for long, but I mention it because it shows, for me, the incredible leadership of the prophet, his willingness to follow the Holy One, no matter how it is accepted immediately by those around him, his incredible foresightedness, because it takes even Abu Bakr a while to realize that this really is a victory. How am I doing?
You're fine.
Okay. So, sharing these few allusions, often just one in one reference to Quran in a presentation, it does provide attendees with a little piece that I think is valuable. It shows them that the revelations that came to Prophet Muhammad came in at a time of need for the developing religion. Sometimes it came, and those of you who know the Sirah know it came in a number of ways, but it came out of the unfolding of the Holy One's purpose and the religion, which is something that non-Muslims hardly ever know, because most of us are not at all familiar with the Quran. So, a bit about pedagogy. What is the format? How do I do it? Now I'm talking about these events about Sirah. Well, I usually begin the event by declaring myself to be a Christian with a deep respect for Prophet Muhammad, and I share briefly how study of Sirah has been a blessing for me, and often a bit about Islam too, but primarily Sirah. Now, of course, this is true, but it also provides, when a Christian says Sirah has been a blessing, it provides a kind of non-binary umbrella for the people meeting, right? It invites them to a kind of openness and engagement, and it helps move past a certain presumption, I think. At least I hope so. I claim the event as inherently challenge and blessing and potentially transformational. In particular, now, and I don't necessarily name these every time, often though I try to, I am particularly committed to expressing qualities of humility, curiosity, and cognitive flexibility, which I believe, they're not everything, but I believe they are part of foundational values in the diminishing of otherness. Humility, curiosity, and cognitive flexibility. Since I don't use a PowerPoint as a supplement to my verbiage, I do two other things. Well, first of all, I move around as much as I can. I used to have to stand in a pulpit. I usually don't anymore. I like to move around because then I can sort of engage with people, and if somebody seems to be falling asleep, you can sort of, wake them up. But there are two other small pieces I do, small in terms of time, but I think very important, that I want to build on in the future. And there are two things that I try to do. I want to nurture a sense of co-creation among everyone who is present, and I want to facilitate some kind of intentional personal engagement among participants. So here's the way I do that. The lectures are usually divided into 3 segments. Each one is about the length of a TED Talk. The segments are separated by brief dyad engagements in response to a simple question that arises out of the material that I have just shared. So I always share the conversion stories of Hamza and Umar. I might, at the break following that, invite them to turn to someone near them and answer this simple question. Which of these stories about Hamza and Umar is most interesting to you and why? That's not much, but it's something. It's sharing your personal experience of it, and it's kind of helping you get a hold of the text, right? What you've just heard. After this very short dyad engagement, I bring the participants back to plenary by beginning to sing the Arabic word on a melodic fragment which they learned at the beginning of our time together. And this is what I want us to do in just a minute if we have time. It's very short. Now, I've used Iqra for when I first began to talk about the revelations and the coming of the angel Jibril to Prophet Muhammad. The segment that night is Iqra. I've also done a couple of others, Alhamdulillah and Inshallah, which is the one I'd like us to share together. The group singing of a very simple melodic fragment introduces a, playful may not be quite the right word, but lighthearted. And it is a way of non-Muslims, who are most of the people present, claiming these words. And they're very important words. And inshallah, as many of you know, is an Arabic word that is coming into common parlance, right? Non-Muslims are starting to say it. So in the singing, there is that kind of energetic thing that happens. They're learning a word, an Arabic word that's important to Islam, but the people who are there are also given the experience of unity and a sense that they are co-creating the event. You don't get that usually if it's just a bunch of people sitting out here listening to the one person. Hey, we're doing great.
Yeah.
You may have to sing Inshallah a lot. Okay. So that's great. That's wonderful. All right. So spinning just briefly in following up on what I'm saying, I have been studying Arabic. I'm still a total beginner, but for a number of reasons. But I'm looking for an Arabic tutor because, as Rania and some of you know, she referred me to Jessica Rugg. Jessica just married a Muslim, I was going to say boy, it's just because she's a lot younger than I am, from Portland, and they are now in Fez, Morocco, or soon will be. So I need an Arabic tutor. I really would prefer someone in Stockton, but maybe not. So I want to put that out there because for many reasons it's important for me to learn. So the last thing about the presentations, I also give supplementary handouts. So I am an educator. That really is how that's the heart of how I understand this. They always include the chronology. Now, can anyone find the chronology anywhere? Yes, but will they? Probably not. So as I'm talking, they've got a chronology there with Battle of, Badr, Uhud, most important, about a dozen things from the Prophet's life. It also has the names and places that are relevant to that particular presentation. And third, I have a brief Sirah bibliography, which has about 6 biographies by Martin Lings, Heron Armstrong, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf's CDs from way back when, and a few others. And I suggest which might be better for a first reader, a first biography. Someone asked me about hostility. I want to share this just briefly. There has been very little thus far, but I think for a number of reasons. One is, and it's one of the reasons, friends, that I chose Sirah, it tends to be a less contentious topic, right? People love stories. That's one of the reasons I chose it. The other thing is that folks who attend these events are self-selected, and they are usually above average in openness, for any of you who know the 5-factor theory of personality. And if you are high or above average openness, that means you tend to be a person of above average curiosity. So we all come bearing our baggage, bearing our filters, bearing our prejudices, but these people who come tend to be curious, or they wouldn't show up. So then the last thing, benefits of the certificate. I have better knowledge, thanks to the Center for Islamic Studies, better knowledge of knowing what I don't know. And I have some sense of who are respected scholars, by whom they're respected, in what arenas or what regards they're expected, where to go for resources. Now, I don't know as much as all you MA and PhD people know. I don't. But I know much more than I would have if I hadn't studied the certificate. I have made friends, connections among Muslims and others in the interreligious community here in Berkeley who are both blessings of my heart, but also resources in various areas of Islam, for which I'm really grateful: textual, historical, cultural, contextual. Another piece of the last piece of it is having the certificate in Islamic Studies. It is a support for authority. Now, all of us here know that this. Whoop, we're not going to get to sing very long. Okay. We all know. Most of you know, but a certificate is only 6 classes. The person on the street, not here in this educational community, whether they are Muslim or non-Muslim, usually don't know that. So if it comes up and I say I have a certificate in Islamic Studies, some people kind of go, ooh. They think it's a master's degree or God knows what, I'm not sure. But it does say something. It says that I'm not just an autodidact. I am, but I'm not just that. It says that I have put myself into a community, exposed myself, and in a way surrendered to the input and the direction of others, right? It says something, and I'm very grateful for that. So I'm very grateful for everything I learned. I'm not going to name everybody here, even you way in the back there, but I'm so grateful. So I want to end with, if you will join me, and I'll tell you how inshallah goes. And I'll tell you, it is such a joy at these presentations to see, there are always a few Muslims there, not many, because it's largely non-Muslim, but to see the kind of joy or levity that can happen. So I hope that will be for us. So here's the way it goes. Inshallah, inshallah, inshallah. And that repeats. Inshallah, inshallah. Then there's a tag. Inshallah. Now, of course, in Western music, a staccato is boop, 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 boop. So let's try it. Inshallah, 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 inshallah. Breathen up. Inshallah. Take it up one more time. Inshallah, 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 inshallah. Amin.
Our next speaker is Ataie, who earned his doctorate in Cultural and Historical Studies and Religion at the GTU in 2016, and he's now an adjunct professor at Zaytuna College and at the GTU.
Thank you to all the organizers. Thank you, Dr. Jiwa, Director of CIS, for everything you do. Thank you, Henry Luce Foundation. Thank you, Dr. Berling, for moderating. And I am from the Blessed. I did study with Dr. Berling. So, thank you, fellow panelists. Thank you all, esteemed colleagues, friends, and teachers. I am a professor at Zaytuna College. It is the very first accredited Muslim college in North America. My area of research is the Quran's relationship with the Bible, the New Testament in particular. Interreligious environment of the GTU provided me with tremendous resources in order to do this type of work. My dissertation was called Authenticating the Johannine Injil. Injil is the Arabic word in the Quran for gospel. So in effect, authenticating the Gospel of John, and then the subtitle is Sunnite Polymorenic Interpretive Methodological Approaches to the Gospel of John, which I can never remember. But polymorenic is a neologism that I invented, by the way. So it's basically an amalgamation of polemical and arenical. So in other words, a confessional approach that is critical and academically rigorous, as well as situated firmly within Sunni tradition. An approach that doesn't simply dismiss the Gospel of John as a corrupted text, but rather takes John seriously and interprets its text through what I call a theo-mystical Sunni lens of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, Abu al-Qasim al-Junayd, Fakhruddin al-Razi, Ibn Ajiba, and even Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. I teach a number of courses at Zaytuna, one of which is called Comparative Theologies, where I place an emphasis on the Abrahamic traditions, that is to say, Judaism and Christianity, and this by popular demand. With respect specifically to our section on Christianity, We actually begin by reading the 4 Gospels in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in English from the Oxford Study Bible. Obviously, all students at Zaytuna are Muslim, and many actually reveal to me that this is the very first time they ever read anything from the Bible. Of course, Mark Van Doren said, if you're living in the West and you haven't read the Bible or studied the Bible, then you've been miseducated. So before we engage in any type of classical Trinitarian theology, before we read the patristics or the Nicene Creed, which we do, by the way, Augustine or Aquinas, before we meet the proclaimed Jesus of the churches, I want my students to experience the textual Jesus of the Gospels for themselves. I'm borrowing these terms from Sandra Schneider's proclaimed Jesus and textual Jesus. The textual Jesus, in other words, the pre-exegetical or pre-canonical Jesus. Initial reactions are fascinating. First of all, due to the students' conviction that engagement in primary languages is of utmost importance when attempting to understand any sacred text, the very idea of reading a translation frustrates many of them. So by the time they get to my class, Comparative Theologies, they're seniors, so they'd have about 4 years of academic Arabic study under their belt. They're actually being the 5th year, because they actually have to do a summer Arabic intensive before even matriculating to their freshman year. There have even been a few students who have wanted me to teach them at least the letters of Hebrew and Greek so that they can read the original words of the Tanakh and New Testament along with some basic vocab. So all students mention that while Matthew, Mark, and Luke are somewhat similar, John is radically unique. That's not unusual. We then discuss the Islamic theological implications of the teachings of Christ as they understand them initially based on the text of the Gospels. We answer interesting questions. Can these texts be reconciled with the teachings of the Quran? What is the relationship between the Quranic textual Jesus and the biblical textual Jesus? Are they at odds? Do they agree? What is the Quran doing with the textual Jesus of the Gospels? Is it a confirmation, a corrective, or both? The key question is, how might the Gospels be understood through the lens of Islamic Unitarian monotheism, which is called Tawheed by Muslim theologians? Just as we can conceive the Quran as being the product of the theological or Christological debates raging in the milieu of late antiquity, in other words, a text in dialogue with monophysite, with Gnostic, with an Nestorian and Ebionite Christian elements, as well as with proto-Talmudic rabbinical Judaism, Arab paganism, and other ancient Near Eastern texts and traditions, perhaps we may gain greater understanding of the theology, eschatology, themes, style, and language of the Gospel of John by examining works penned by other Jews of John's era, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls, or the life of Moses by Philo, who indeed refers to Moses as theos, without the article, which he means as a sort of divinized or sanctified created being or special agent of God in mystical union with God, not God himself, which he calls Ha'un from the Septuagint. So Exodus chapter 3, when Moses is at the burning bush, and he says, when I go back to my people, the Israelites, are going to ask me your name, what should I say? And then the Hebrew says, tell them, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, which is translated by the Septuagint, by the translators of the Septuagint, as Ego Emmi Ho'an, I am the one who is. Ho'an, the one who is. This is the divine title of God, according to Philo. Thus, John calls Christ monogenes theos in the prologue, a uniquely divinized or one-of-a-kind reflection of God on earth, the one who resides in the kalpantu patros, in the bosom of the Father, or the heart of the Father, meaning one who is beloved of the Father, and thus exegesato, the one who reveals, exegetes literally, the Father. So no one has at any time seen God. The monogenes theos, a uniquely divinized agent who is in the heart of the Father, reveals him. This divine agent Christology also preserves, according to a Muslim reading, intertestamental consistency, as Hosea says, Ki anochi el velo ish in the Hebrew, Indeed, I am God and not a man, as opposed to divine incarnation Christology, which is Trinitarian Christology. Interestingly, the Johannine Jesus, who is described by the evangelist as Ha-Logos, the Word, is viewed by many Muslim students as a spiritual master. This is sort of their initial inclination when reading the Gospel of John. One of them said, he's a Sufi master, one who has annihilated himself in the love and character of the Father, or Abba in Syriac, which some students contend is probably congruous to the Arabic Rabb, meaning Lord, a term denoting God's immanence to his creation. And this is how Imam al-Ghazali interprets the term Father as well in the Gospel. In fact, this is a Hebraism, Isaiah 64, Ata Adonai Avinu, you are the Lord our Father. Jesus teaches in Matthew 5, his people how to pray, Avunda Vashmeo, our Father who art in heaven. Students are surprised to not discover, according to them, any explicit claims of deity made by the textual Jesus of the Johannine Gospel. They see the Johannine Christ as a perfected divine agent, one who enjoys intimate theocetic mystical union with God, such that when Christ speaks and acts, it is as if, or ka'anna, as Ibn Arabi says, it is as if God is speaking and acting. Jesus says in John 5:19, the Son can do nothing by himself, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever he does, the Son does in a similar, hamoios way, in a similar way. And this hamoios is the word, the base word of hamoiousios, which was declared heresy at Nicene, the Council of Nicaea in 325. Hamausios, meaning of the same substance, was the winner that day. Such union and relationship is intimated by Christ in John 10:30. Ego kai ha pater hen esmen, I and the Father are one. This statement is immediately compared by my Muslim students to something in the Quran, which states, whoever obeys the messenger, in this case meaning the messenger Muhammad, peace be upon him, is obeying God. Ma yuti ar-rasul faqad ata Allah. Not because of ontological or essential sameness, but rather because of a union of will born out of obedience and love. This is called al-jama' in Arabic, mystical union, or theosis in Greek, or devekut, a type of clinging to God in Hebrew. Now, the vast majority of classical and contemporary Muslim scholars, called ulama, confessional scholars, are proponents of what I call the Injil archetype theory, which states that Jesus, peace be upon him, received an ipsissima verba revelation from God in the Syriac language, which at some point was written down, but then suddenly lost, then only reflected in some ambiguous way in the later, quote, pseudo-gospels written in the foreign Greek language, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So according to this theory, while Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John contain elements of truth, their texts are corrupt beyond repair, and the archetype is lost forever. I contend, however, and I want my students to think about this deeply, that the earliest exegetes of the Quran may have taken a different stance based upon the Quran itself. Perhaps the position of the Quran itself is rather a textually affirming position with respect to the Gospels of the New Testament. Perhaps the Injil archetype theory only crystallized among later exegetes due to their anemic understandings of the biblical text, and because they concluded superficially that the Quran and Bible are irreconcilable. The latter must have been corrupted. However, scholastic giants of the later period, such as Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, who's called the Proof of Islam, who wrote the Summa Theologica of our tradition, called the Revival of the Religious Sciences, as long as the famous exegete Fakhruddin al-Razi, as well as the Egyptian scholar Ibn Umar al-Biqa'i, they all took the position that the text of the New Testament Gospels was sound. The latter of these, al-Biqa'i, even used the Bible as a primary source of Quranic exegesis, and even wrote a Tessaron, or Gospel harmony, of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Thus, the Quran's criticisms are not directed towards Christian scripture, but rather Christian beliefs. Thus, tahrif, or corruption, or alteration of some sort, is only on the level of post-apostolic exegetical traditions and dogmas, not on the level of the biblical text. In other words, the Quran criticizes Trinitarian Christianity, not the Gospel of John. A few examples from the Quran, I think, will suffice. So in Surah 10, verse 94, God speaks to the Prophet, and by extension to all Muslims, and some say to others. He says, وَإِن كُنْتَ فِي الشَّكِّ مِمَّا أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ. If you should be in doubt about what we have revealed to you, meaning the Quran, if you're in doubt about the Quran, فَاسْأَلِ الَّذِينَ يَقْرَؤُونَ الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِ. Then just ask those who have been reading the book before you. Al-Kitab in Arabic, and of course the word Bible, tabablion, means the book. In Arabic, the Holy Bible is called Al-Kitabul Muqaddas, the Holy Book. So the Quran here is saying that basically the Quran is acting as a musaddiq, which is a common refrain for the Quran, in the Quran, a confirmation of the Torah and the Gospel. Another famous verse is chapter 15, verse 9, which again is not on the board here. 15:9, which says, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun." Very famous verse. That indeed we, royal plural, pluralis majestatis, indeed we have sent down the reminder, and indeed we are guarding it from corruption. So at dhikr, the reminder, is usually taken to be the Quran, that God is protecting the Quran at dhikr. But the verse doesn't say al-Quran. It can say Quran. There's many places in the Quran where it does say Quran. But the word here is at dhikr, the reminder. Now if you go one chapter over, chapter 16, verse 43, we have this word again, at dhikr. And it says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. If you don't know, ask the people of remembrance. Now there is an opinion here that the people of remembrance are the scholars of the Quran. But you also have other opinions. Imam Qurtubi, Imam al-Tabari, Imam al-Zamakhshari, and many others who say the people of dhikr here are Jews and Christians. That if you don't know something, you can ask Jews and Christians because the implication is their scriptures are sound. Another verse, chapter 5, verse 47. وَلْيَحْكُمْ أَهْلُ الْكِتَابِ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ. There's different ways of understanding. Okay. There's different ways of understanding this. One way of translating this is that let the people of the gospel judge the Quran by what has been revealed in the gospel. Let the people of the gospel judge the Quran by what has been revealed in the gospel. So the verse intimates that the gospel remains an authentic revelation. So it seems like a major argument of the Quran is if only the Christians would read the gospel through the proper lens, a rigidly monotheistic Semitic lens, and not through the lens, the highly Hellenistic lens of Trinitarianism or Homoousian Christology, they would come to believe the Quran is also a confirmation of it and the revelation of God. So when the Christian says, okay, I'll read the gospel, the Muslim then says, wait a minute, you don't have the gospel. It's corrupted. It's lost. Finally, the Quran has multiple intertextual references and allusions to certain passages found in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So if the Quran considers the biblical text to be corrupt, which is the dominant opinion among scholars, then why make such allusions? There seems to be something internally contradictory about referencing a text as being a confirmation for another text, while simultaneously believing it to be a corrupted text. So for example, the Quran calls Jesus the Word of God, and John, the Baptist, a witness concerning the Word, مُصَدِّقًا بِكَلِمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ. That's echoing the prologue, almost verbatim. The Quran says Jesus healed a man born blind, and it's very precise, born blind, echoing John 9. That's the only place where this miracle happens in the New Testament. The Quran calls the gospel Injil, which is a Greek word, not some Semitic word like Bushra or something like that. Injil is from the Greek Evangelion, which could suggest that the gospel was revealed in Greek, rather Syriac. The Quran says Mary is chosen above the women of all nations, echoing the Lucan narrative. The Quran says Jesus was helped by Ruh al-Qudus, by the Holy Spirit, echoing paraclete passages of John 14 and 16. And there's many other places. In the Hadith, Sahih Bukhari, which is considered to be a very authentic canonized book of Hadith amongst Sunni Muslims, it says, Kitab al-Wahi, in the first chapter of the volume, that Waraqa bin Nawfal, a Christian scribe living in Mecca, who was a cousin of the Prophet's wife Khadijah, it says he used to write, كَانَ يَكْتُبُ الْإِنْجِيلِ. He used to write the Gospel, بِالْعَرَبِ وَالْعِبْرِ, in Arabic and in Hebrew. So what is Waraqa writing? The archetype, the Q source document? What exactly is he writing? Obviously, he's writing the New Testament. So in conclusion, this opinion about the status of the Bible does not come from thin air. It is a precedent in classical Islamic scholarship. The theological parameters of Sunni orthodoxy are wider than we think, and this is what I want my students to be at least aware of, what I call thinking outside the box, within the box. That's my big finish.
Thank you so much. Last but by no means least, we have Kamal Abu-Shamsieh, who has a PhD, who is a PhD candidate in practical theology, and his dissertation proposal was just approved, so he's in dissertation and sees the end on the horizon. And he's a community outreach liaison at Heinz Hospice and international trainer in Islamic chaplaincy, a field that he has opened up. Come on.
Observation I've noticed in my travels, just similar to here, the media is absent in situations like this. If it's a GTU organized on extremism to mention something, you'll find them all lining up. All the dignitaries have left, but there is something here of distinction I've noticed. The president, from beginning to now, is still here. So I would like to acknowledge your presence and thank you. This is something I have not seen in 18 trips to the Arab and Muslim world since 2013. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate. Allahumma la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka anta as-sami'ul 'alim. All knowledge is from God, subhanahu wa ta'ala. A word of thanks to the Center for Islamic Studies, to all my colleagues and our mentors who continue to mentor us. Special thanks to my professor, my coordinator for my thesis, Herbert Anderson, who is retired and came out of retirement to help me out. And I see also Dr. Hatem Bazian, a member of my committee, member of the committee of many students who continue to mentor them here. So without you, we could not even make it a step forward. And as I'm standing before you, I'm still feeling the roasting from yesterday. So I'm a bit sore, mentally and physically, yet I will try to share with you my journey, which is evolving. I'm among the chosen one to be in her class. So thank you so much, Dr. Judith. I started in Shizer, in the cultural and historical studies of religion, and Dr. Farian Marina, Sister Marianne, helped me out in figuring out my ways in ethics, yet could not continue within that area and moved into interdisciplinary studies. Early on noticed that there is a challenge within the Islamic studies, which I will talk about in details. Before coming to the GTU, I served as, I'm a Sunni Muslim, served as a director of a Shiite Islamic Center for 7 years. So that's a little bit of a cross into a boundary that sometimes people will cross. Being at the GTU is like home for me, because you're crossing boundaries all the time. Without hesitation, you're being pushed. As my Catholic friends, they say, baptism by fire. You move us into areas that we have not been moved into. And I chose practical theology in reflections on following Dr. Ali, I don't want to be following you. It's really difficult to be coming to speak about Christianity after Ali. Yet I will ask you, if you are to take the last 5 days of Jesus out of Christianity, what would remain out of it? In Islam, and that's where my thesis will be, it's not a comparative studies. It's about the last 5 days of the Prophet's life. It's the end that signifies the beginning, and is one of my courses for my master's at the Mennonite Biblical Seminary. One of the scholars by the name of Berkeley wrote about the Old Testament of the Old Testament. When you rewrite, you fast forward to rewrite the beginnings. And here we fast forward in Islam to the last breath of the Prophet to understand what Islam is. Not the beginning, because it has been a linear journey for most Muslims. Since 2013, I conducted 18 international conferences and seminars. South Africa, Jordan, Palestine, Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia, United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Oman, and Saudi Arabia, to learn and to teach Islamic chaplaincy. And the results were really amazing. We started with the concept of spiritual care. As a concept, it took me about 2 years just to give the concept. And as we go, the questions became, is it relevant to Islam? The second question, is it permissible to talk about spiritual care? And the third question that students will ask, is it beneficiary? So this community is the first thing, as we have legal scholars from Ahmad and others, it's a legal community. So before we progress anything, we have to go through the filter of law before anything else to answer the three questions. Is it relevant? Is it halal? Is it permissible to study something, a field that has been developed in the West? And to bring a title of chaplain with that loaded term, comes from a chapel, comes from definitely Christian, to go into the heart of Sunni Islam to Saudi Arabia. Yet what I discovered, the gifts in my travel. Few years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, there was, during the reign of Khalifa Umar, that Muslim established the Waqf Mu'nis al-Marda. Waqf is a legal term and implies that there is funding and there is endorsement from all the authorities. Mu'nis al-Marda is the one who brings solace to the patients. And that is the heart of chaplaincy in the 6th century, practiced by Muslims. But it took someone to go to the GTU to import all the education from here and take it back to the heart of Islam to teach about the context. My philosophy is never the banking model. I'm not there to deposit whatever I understood or learned into the minds and hearts of my students. And that's something, the first thing I was taught by Dr. Berling is, don't do banking. Don't go there and load them with knowledge. You'll fry their brains. And also discovered a concept that was very difficult for me to grasp. I asked you many times, give me an example to a wild card. What's a wild card is? And I happened to understand it, that it's you. You bring whatever you bring into the table. It is the wild card, is every single person in the room here. So we'll talk about relations. So my approach is relational, to understand, to be invited and accept that invitation to be within the circle of someone. And our process of learning is reflective practice, where I don't know what happens between healthcare chaplains and their patients, they invite me into their areas. They invite me into the sphere, and they describe. Along the way, I receive the gifts of learning myself and growth. And together we struggle with mysteries that we don't understand, including rejection, including areas that all the books, when I did my master's, talking about healthcare to Muslim patients, somehow described the Muslim as someone is fully practicing of Islam, which is a myth. It does not exist. The largest congregation within the hospital is the no religious preference. Those who don't profess any religion, and that's where 80% of the Muslims are today. Maybe fear, back to Islamophobia. I don't know how you will treat me. But nevertheless, you have to sift, to look for the gems, to find them, to bring them out of their shadows, and to provide a presence. There is no necessity to have theories, just the presence. And one of them is the present. We're talking about now. And that's oftentimes, most people ignore that, the power of the present moment. And in English, the word for gift is a present. So you don't give something in the future, you don't give something yesterday, you give something in the present moment. And I learned from my Catholic colleagues who, at the death of one patriarch, the priest led a mass at the bedside. I said, that's not in the book of Catholic teaching how to offer pastoral care. He said, no, the context is more important than the books. That family needed something to be left with them. So we learn all these gifts. And that brought me to challenges that I learned. There is the challenge of silos in learning about Islam. The scholar of hadith will not talk to the scholar of law, will not talk to the scholar of Quran. Each one works within their own disciplines, rarely that they venture from one area into another. But it might feel the most challenging area that I found is the linear understanding of the narratives of what's happened in the Sirah, what's happened in the Revelation. I made it a point to ask all the participants one question in every country I visited. Can you recite and tell me the encounter of the Prophet with the angel Jibreel, the archangel, in the first encounter of Revelation? Can you tell me the story? It's all about telling stories. And the story, all linear, verbatim, brainwashed somehow, is the Prophet was in the cave, and angel Jibreel came to him and told him read, and told him, asked what to read, and squeezed him and ran to his wife Khadija and cover me and cover me. So that's the same story that has been recited. Yet I ask, what's about that story that makes sense to you or important to you as someone who's in healthcare? And that is the power of making those stories, significant events, relevant to the context that we're in. As a chaplain, I look at that story. The Prophet is a human being, had an encounter that is overwhelming to him. In the sources describe that he thought he's going crazy. That's how much the powerful of the encounter was. He did not know what to do. He went to someone, happened to be his wife, the most trusted person in his life, and she assured him. She used tools that we use in chaplaincy, which is providing positive elements to uplift the individual. Yet she could not help him personally. She facilitated support by taking him to Waraqah ibn Nawfal, happened to be a Christian, and taught him that this, what you went through, is the sign of revelation. It's the same story. Yet it makes sense to the chaplain, and then I encourage the female chaplain, say, who among you will be the next Khadija, the next wife of the Prophet? Was there to believe in him. Then we encounter other stories. In chaplaincy, we talk a lot about nonverbal communication. And I asked, can there a book or research to describe the facial expressions of the Prophet's face when he passed by the early Muslims who were tortured and encouraged them to be patient? Was he standing while they were laying down and tortured? Did he tell them to be patient and gave them the good news to the family of Ammar while he was passing through? Or did he stop? Did he come down to their level, or was he standing? Those are narratives that deserve to be re-narrated and examined, just because one single interpretation of those elements is not enough to be relevant to, if Islam is to be a faith, is relevant to all times, contexts, and situations. One of the stories is the first revelation, the torture, the vulnerability of the Prophet himself when he experienced the rejection at Ataie and pleaded to God for support and was gifted with the Isra and Mi'raj. So I take the last 5 days of the Prophet's life and to look at the intersection between ethics and law. For him as an individual who lived right next to the mosque, who could not attend the prayer in congregation, who was the leader of the prayer and assigned one of his colleagues, Abu Bakr, to be the leader of the prayer, that he utilized the rukhsa, leniency, that is already available. So when we're talking about the last 2 verses of the Quran being done and the revelation is done, we look at the intersection between the texts and the practice and how he practiced Islam in the last 48 hours of his life. One of the things that we look at as a patient is struggling in end of life is we look at the text, and our community is textual. For every context, we pulled verses from the Quran. And it's challenged me big time on that. Yes, you have a text for every context, but how about your understanding of the text? Or what our perceived understanding of the text? And how is that text going to be worked out within the context? So is that text is good for all contexts? Or can the context really change the practice of the individual? Linking that to revelation itself, which is a response to contexts. So the power of the context is already embedded in Islam, but all outside of the box, as Dr. Ali said, but within that box of Sharia, not to depart outside of the realm of Sharia. So the path is wide open within, sometimes we narrow it. And that brings me to practical theology and the development of an Islamic practical theology for end-of-life care, to look at the works of other scholars like David Tracy and Don Browning, who look at the revised correlation theory, which today we look at the power of theory or text, and then take it to the context, and then we go back to the text to look at where in the text after understanding the context, and that can be manifested in many fields, especially in bioethics. When we look at maqasid al-Sharia, or the theory of jurisprudence, the purpose of the jurisprudence in Islam, which I put as part of the Islamic practical theology, to look at Islamic law, that the foundation of ethics is law, yet the intention of the law is ethical as well. So they are intertwined, cannot be separated. And look at those and how that can be powerful enough in the context of end-of-life care. To finish it with how I understand the last few days of the Prophet, that he affirmed the theology of monotheism when he was asked by Angel Gabriel, when he was about to take his last breath. It's the choice that he chose to be with Allah, and that is affirming the theology of practicing. Then we look at the ethics of burial, that he died on a Monday around 10 o'clock in the morning, and his burial was after Tuesday, between 10 o'clock at night on Tuesday and before 5 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. And as I encounter Muslims who struggle to say, we need to bury immediately, yet how about the ethics of waiting for someone to come from New York to attend the last burial and the last minute, as the rights of removing harm is first before the benefits. So we look at all this theory. I'm condensing all that because of the time, but look at all of these to understand how the last 48 hours of the Prophet's life is significant to moving forward with understanding of our own practice. Thank you so much.
I want us to thank these people again. This panel has shown us the importance of story, the importance of paying attention to learners, pastoral sensitivity, and also scholarship, knowing what you're doing, and they've all exemplified this, so let's thank them very much.